Hello everybody and welcome back again to the world of underground hip hop. Now I know after watching that Ken Carson video you guys probably thought that I would do Destroy Lonely directly after, but I actually wanted to do something a little bit different here. With Ken Carson we got to see a kid rapidly rise the ranks of the underground scene, gaining fame at a very young age and getting basically everything he could ever want musically, whereas today I want to talk about an artist who took a little bit longer to get where he wanted to get. Because time and time again I see a lot of people get frustrated when they haven't made it musically past the age 25. You got all these kids blowing up at 19, 20, some people are even 16, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get to where you want to get. And I feel like the perfect example of that is the rapper known as Sinister, somebody that a lot of you may have heard of before, but many of you may have still not. And if you haven't, well, lock in because he has a fairly entertaining story that has never been told before on YouTube, so that's what I wanted to do today, put together all the details and lore to give you the full story of how Sinister got to where he is now. So without further ado, let's look into the story of Sinister. Scott Gonzalez was born in Anatosh, California on November 14, 1991. Growing up fairly regularly, besides the fact that his parents would divorce when he was at the age of 5, but despite them breaking up, they were still very active in his life, as well as the rest of his extended family, with him often going over to his cousins on weekends to play video games. However, the video games themselves would never really maintain his attention, and he would instead choose to listen to music on his cousin's cassette player, listening to bands like Linkin Park and Slipknot. However, as time went on, he found himself sinking deeper and deeper into the metal genre, listening to acts like Cannibal Corpse and Dark Throne, as well as a little bit of hip-hop as well, listening to 50 Cent and Eminem. So of course, being a big fan of both metal and hip-hop, he was quickly drawn to artists like DMX, Waka Flocka, and Lil Jon, who brought a more aggressive style to the generic trap beats of the time, creating some of the earliest versions of what people would describe as scream rap or trap metal nowadays, influencing Sinister to do the same when he got older. But of course, at the time, screaming over rap beats was seen as completely out of the question for him, so he would instead try to become a full-on metal artist, fronting a couple bands at the time. One of the most well-known bands that he was a part of at the time was called God It Remains, which actually gained somewhat of a fan base within California, with them playing small venues all over the area. Although at the time Sinister was only about 14 years old, so he wasn't very experienced with his screaming vocals and actually ended up recording his first ever song in a bathroom because he couldn't afford studio time. But surprisingly, the acoustics in the bathroom were actually so good that he would continue the trend to only recording music at home, still never recording a song in an official studio to this day. However, unfortunately, even with his band doing pretty well, it wasn't long before it broke up, leading him to bounce from band to band throughout the rest of his teenage years. But none of that did anything to stop Sinister's love for music. In fact, he loved music so much that it would actually start to consume his entire life, with him going into class, putting his headphones on, and not listening to anything the teacher had to say. And this led him to flunking all of his classes, meaning that he didn't have enough credits to graduate high school, and in order to finish off his education, he would instead have to go to a continuation school. Now, Sinister never really got along with the kids in his high school, always having his own friend group that lived in different cities that he would play Call of Duty and Airsoft with on the weekends, but once he got to this continuation school, things got a whole lot worse. Now, seeing as how Sinister was a big metalhead growing up, he always remained straight edge, never dabbling with drinking or smoking, but once he got to the continuation school, almost every single kid was at least smoking cigarettes, if not doing acid, and some of them were even doing heroin at the age of 16. But despite the rough surroundings, Sinister would eventually manage to graduate from high school and get into the real world, and once he was there was really only one thing he wanted to do. That's right, join the army. Now I know you guys are probably thinking with how much he loved music growing up that he would immediately want to jump into it, either joining another metal band or maybe recording some demos, trying to get signed to a label. But you have to keep in mind this was still the early 2010s, so it wasn't so easy to get your music out there. You would actually have to physically hand out CDs to people or try to get your music on the radio if you wanted to make it. There was no SoundCloud. Spotify was still in its beta at the time, and basically the only way to share your music online was through MySpace, which definitely wasn't a very lucrative option at the time. So instead, Sinister took his second love and decided to join the army at the age of 17 before heading off at the age of 18. This meant that Sinister would have to leave the band that he was in at the time, known as Immortus, which once again was gaining quite a bit of popularity in the local scene, but unfortunately, Sinister was now a grown man and he had to make his own way into the world. During the first couple years that he was enlisted in the army, he was stationed in Kentucky, completely away from where he grew up in California, leading to a lot of loneliness, although he would eventually meet his first wife around the time on a website known as Plenty of Fish. With the two of them getting married right before Sinister ended up heading to Afghanistan for 9 months, where he would end up listening to a bunch of pirated Waka Flocka CDs that he bought at the local bazaar, and surprisingly, even managed to record some music. During this time, he was part of a duo called Nexium with a woman named Tanya, who unfortunately ended up passing away, leading to the end of the project, but that just goes to show how dedicated Sinister was to making music, with him being in an an active war zone at the time, but still finding a way to record and put something out. Upon returning from Afghanistan, he would head back to Kentucky for the following years before finally leaving the army altogether at the age of 23, with him immediately moving to Georgia to live with his then wife, as well as getting tattoos on his hands to prove that he was completely dedicated to his craft and that's all he wanted to do with the rest of his life. Although unfortunately music wasn't paying the bills at the time, so he ended up working at a comic book store for the following year, and this is when he really started to create his persona known as Sinister. Now there's really not a whole lot of remaining music from this period because, as he describes in his own words, most of what he was putting out was pretty trash. Although from what we can gather, it was definitely a lot more horrorcore than trap metal at the time, with him being heavily inspired by the Juggalo movement, even becoming part of the community through Facebook, with his first ever EP, Them, actually being created by two other artists named Fetus and Sleep Lyrical, who only asked Sinister to jump on it at the last minute before release. Despite the relatively rushed nature of the project, it's actually not too bad and would gain him a little bit of attention within the Juggalo community, even going out to perform at some local shows, but it's definitely nothing like the modern day sound that he's now known for. Although one funny thing about this era is that he actually ended up getting into a beef with an artist known as Sinister, who's a classic Juggalo artist that was initially signed to Psychopathic Records, but really hadn't had a hit in over 10 years at that point. And this all happened because Sinister was trying to use the name Sinister as his rap name, and apparently Sinister felt like he was the only one that should be able to use that, and he decided to message him saying, "I'm going to take back the name before the year is over," which led many Juggalos to attack Sinister, calling him a poser who was trying to rip off Juggalo royalty, whatever that means. But overall, this doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of Sinister's career because he's now much more popular than that original Juggalo one, so guess he had the last laugh. Unfortunately for Sinister, it didn't feel that way at the time though, so he'd put the mic back down for a couple more months while he tried to figure out what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. And upon realizing the reason that his music didn't sound the way that he wanted it to was all because of the production and mixing, he decided to pursue a career at the Atlanta Institute of Music, picking up a couple audio engineering classes. And during the time that he was studying there, he would drop his first ever solo project called Malice, which overall really didn't push the needle on getting him any more attention or fame in the local scene, but it did have a feature from Twisted Insane, which was pretty crazy for the time. Apparently back then, all you had to do was hit up Twisted Insane on Facebook and ask them for a feature, pay them for it, and just like that, you can have one of the most legendary rappers of all time on a song. It's funny how much times have changed, because nowadays if you want to buy a feature from even a fallen off artist like Kid Boo, you got to pay half up front and then go talk to a manager, then you got to get the rights to the beat, and then you end up getting scammed. But luckily for Sinister, he didn't end up getting scammed and would continue to invest in himself in the following years, picking up an extra job at Amazon to make sure he had a little bit of extra money to spend on features, promo, and everything else that he would need to get his name out there. But funnily enough, even though this took place during 2017 in the prime of SoundCloud, when every rapper was popping off the app left and right, Sinister decided not to post his music on there. Now this might have been because he was part of the Juggalo community at the time and they're a little bit more old school, but either way, he put all of his projects on Spotify through DistroKid, and because of that, his growth was a little bit stunted at the time. However, once 2018 rolled around, he would start to discover artists like Bones, Puya, Fat Nick, and Suicide Boys, which would show him that there was an audience on the app, as well as showing him an entire different side of the underground that he had never experienced before. This would lead him to completely change up his style, and by the time that his next project dropped, called Diatribe, he was completely away from that horrorcore sound and was now running with a more aggressive trap style akin to what Ghostmane was putting out at the time, or somebody like City Morgue. At the time, nobody was calling this style trap metal, instead calling it aggressive trap or scream rap, but it seemed like Sinister knew enough about the scene to know who was popular and immediately would buy a feature from Sos Mula. Unfortunately, this was a little bit too early for Sinister to cop a feature from Sos Mula, as his vocals weren't up to par and the production from DJ Spit wasn't very good either, and nowadays he's pretty ashamed of the song. However, in 2020, he would remake the song with Young Germ, a pretty prominent producer for City Morgue, who did a very good job at it and kind of rectified the song. So overall, he eventually got his money's worth, but at the time, it didn't push the needle. However, Sinister would start to catch a lot of attention online once his tracks started to get posted on Trash AMV, with the first one being known as Bullet Bag, featuring Witch House 40K, which now sits at over 200,000 views. So nowadays, everybody knows about AMV channels and how you can get your music posted up with some flashy visuals, and sometimes it helps to blow you up, although it does come with the pitfall of nobody knowing what you look like, so your music becomes popular, but your actual persona somewhat suffers. But one very forgotten method of getting your music out there back in the day was these comparison channels who would post up videos like Scarlord vs Project, Zillakami vs Cameron Nazi, and Subjects, and surprisingly, these videos got a lot of views. And Sinister would manage to get himself posted on one of these channels called NX Bands, comparing him to both Zillakami Kami and Scarlord, the two biggest artists in the trap metal scene at the time and even nowadays. And this video actually got over 500,000 views, which is crazy to think about, but it definitely put a lot of new eyes on Sinister and his music and helped to push him even farther. After that, there was a couple more comparison videos, one with Ghostmane and Sinister, followed up by King and Cameron Nazi versus him, which is kind of cool to see that him and King had that connection back in the day, although I don't think they actually know each other. However, these two follow-up videos didn't do as well in the view department, and before long, the algorithm would completely change on YouTube, making it so this style of channel would completely fall out of favor, and AMV channels would start to suffer as well. But even with the changing landscape online, Sinister had managed to gain himself enough buzz to land an opener spot on a tour alongside Jay Green, Cold Blooded, and Omen 13, which was pretty impressive at the time as they were all part of Schema Posse. He would go on to say that this tour didn't open up as many opportunities as he had initially hoped, but it would at least give him some experience with life on the road, as well as forming a connection with Schema Posse, which would pay off somewhere down the road. By the time this tour wrapped up, it was 2019, and Sinister would once again start to drop albums, starting off with one called Onslaught, followed up by another called Flak Jacket, and then finally finishing off the year with one named Widowmaker. And on top of that, he would also get the chance to open for Jake Hill, which was a pretty big opportunity for him and actually ended up opening some doors. But unfortunately, even with his musical career finally going in a positive direction and him getting the opportunities that he had always hoped for, his personal life would start to suffer when him and his at the time wife ended up going through a separation, followed up by a full-on divorce. And on top of that, in the following year, the pandemic would break out, meaning that Sinister could no longer perform at live shows, cutting off an entire source of income for him, as well as kind of destroying his motion that he had going in real life. But on the flip side of things, there was more people on the internet than ever before, with many people sitting home with nothing else to do besides listen to music and look for entertainment, so it was a very good time for Sinister to drop his first ever WorldStarHipHop music video. Now, this was pretty unheard of for trap metal acts at the time. I mean, City Morgue had been on there in the previous years, but besides them, most trap metal artists never thought to try to get a video on the channel, so for Sinister to do this was actually a pretty clever plan. And on top of that, he would get away from his normal style, going for a more balls to the wall, ignorant type of 6ix9ine song called Russian AK, complete with a music video of him and all his military buddies strapped up with guns, going crazy, screaming, basically everything you would want from a trap metal artist.
Russian AK, get the drum and leave him gushing. Whole squad of shooters and we laying down the scunion. 7.62s, catch your bodies by the dozen.
And while the comments on that video definitely weren't very kind to him, with a lot of people comparing him to 6ix9ine or calling him corny and a myriad of other things, the views definitely did pay off, with it hitting over 100k in a month, followed up by 200k. And nowadays the video sits at over 300,000 views on YouTube alone, which is pretty impressive for a WorldStarHipHop music video, considering nowadays they have a hard time even cracking 10k. And Sinister would immediately capitalize on that hype by dropping 3 more projects called Diatribe 2, Lost in London, and Hellfire, which all had that same trap metal style that he had been running with in the previous years, but by the time that 2021 rolled around, he would completely change his style once again. And that's all because he would discover 2 pretty prevalent funk producers on TikTok known as Ghostface Playa and Pharmacist, who he would then reach out to and ask to use their beats for something that had never been done before. That's right, he was gonna scream over funk beats. Now, honestly, that doesn't sound too crazy to me. I mean, funk has been in the underground forever, and trap metal is a genre that doesn't really change or adapt in many ways, so combining the two definitely seems like at least an interesting idea that could work out, but apparently the funk community really didn't vibe with that. Apparently the funk community is full of a lot more purists than I initially thought, because they saw it as an abomination to the funk sound and outright refused to play it at most venues. However, despite the massive pushback, he would continue to run with that style and ended up dropping his next project called Darkness Before Light, which surprisingly caught the attention of a funk distributor named Black 17. And it was because of this company that Sinister was able to get connected to the legendary funk producer known as Cordell, who would do a song with him called One Shot, One Kill, which is now Sinister's biggest song by far, sitting at over 11 million streams on Spotify. And of course, now that Sinister had that co-sign from Cordell, all the people who were hating on that style before immediately became fans and started gassing it up. And because of his newfound fame in the funk community, he was able to start selling features to a multitude of artists, and surprisingly, he actually ended up doing all the features and never scammed a single person. It's crazy to think that you can actually do that. I think Young Simi, Little Lotus, and 83 Hades definitely need to take notes. And on top of selling all those features, he would start to do interviews with channels like Cult Classic, as well as Hype Talk TV, the absolute GOAT of the interview community. And all these factors combined would help to get him over 2 million monthly listeners on Spotify alone, but unfortunately in the following year of 2022, the war would break out between Ukraine and Russia, leading Russia to be taken off of Spotify and cutting his numbers in half. Because yeah, there's a little known fact about people who make dark trap, trap metal, and horrorcore. A lot of their fans come from Russia because it's pretty depressing over there, meaning that most people identify with that type of sound a lot more than people in America do. You can make fun of people for having a primarily Russian audience, but even some of your favorites like Lil Peep, Ghostmane, and even Suicide Boys have a lot more Russian fans than they do in America. I mean, Suicide Boys have definitely become more popular in America in the past few years, but for a long time, a majority of their audience came from Russia. But even with Sinister's numbers starting to go down on Spotify, he was once again able to land a tour alongside Oni Inc. and Witch House 40K, which was pretty successful with 7 shows in 10 days. However, it wasn't until after this tour that his life would change forever when he ended up opening for an artist known as Harper to a crowd of over 400 people. And it was at that very same show that Sinister would get to meet one of the biggest upcoming artists in the underground scene named Sempra, who was actually previously a member of Schema Posse. And because Sinister had previously worked with Schema Posse, the two of them were able to connect pretty fast. And the two of them ended up dropping a song together called Ultra Violence, which ended up becoming one of Sinister's most popular songs, sitting at over 10 million streams on Spotify alone. And I definitely feel like that is a big time feature because in my opinion, I think Sempra is going to be even bigger than Killswitch, Puya, and a lot of the mainstays in the underground. And it was because of this connection to Sempra and Harper that Sinister was able to get noticed by Mikey the Magician, who supposedly even wanted to sign him to All But Six for a while, but for one reason or another, it never ended up happening. But even though this deal didn't end up going through, Sinister would get the chance to be the opener for Killswitch on his first ever headlining tour, and he was actually the only opener, so that definitely helped to get him a lot more eyes than he had ever had on him before. And after getting off that tour, he would sign a publishing deal with a company that Mikey the Magician started up himself, so even though he wasn't All But Six, he definitely is affiliated to some degree. And that Killswitch tour wasn't the only one that he would go on that year, because he immediately ended up going on another one with both Harper and Sempra, as well as playing some big festivals in the Czech Republic, which unfortunately meant that he had to miss the Gathering of the Juggalos. Yeah, that's right, all these years later, they actually wanted to invite Sinister to perform at the Gathering of the Juggalos, even though he doesn't really identify as one anymore. But honestly, I think he picked the right choice because he could have had a good set there, but at the same time, the Juggalos can be pretty aggressive to anybody who's an outsider. I mean, they started a fight with Chapo, they throw piss bottles at people. Puya wasn't even able to perform there at one point, which might have actually been a base move by the Juggalos, not gonna lie. And after getting home from that tour, Sinister would once again start dropping music on Trash AMV with tracks like Tarantino featuring the artist Shush, 22 Wolf, and Drift featuring Cam Steady. With every single one of these videos now sitting at over 100k views, which once again is pretty impressive for Trash AMV because they're having a hard time hitting 20k nowadays, so 100k is nothing to sneeze at. And that just goes to show that Sinister is actually growing more and more prominent by the year, with him even getting one of the biggest features of his entire career in 2024 with the band Nothing More on a track called Stuck. And I don't know anything at all about this side of music, but apparently they must be a pretty popular band because the song on Spotify now sits at over 1 million views and the music video alone has 500,000 views, so pretty impressive numbers. And all of that goes to show that age really doesn't matter when it comes to music. I see a lot of artists hitting the age of 21, 22, sometimes even 28 and saying, you know what, I gotta wrap it up, I haven't made it where I wanted to and I never will. But I'm telling you, all these artists popping off at the age of 19 is a complete illusion. Usually they have connections in the industry or they have somebody backing them with a lot of money. It's not that easy to really get established in music that fast. Oftentimes it takes years to really hone your style and even longer than that to finally find your audience. You gotta shift, change, try different ways to get your name out there, play shows, fail, flop, and eventually you will make it if you just keep trying. If you really want to do music as your full-time job, then it has to be a full-time commitment. You can't just make a couple songs songs, see them flop, and then give up altogether. If you're willing to give up that easy, it means you really don't want it that bad. And even though there's always going to be artists in the scene that just want to make money and blow up as fast as they possibly can, there's always going to be people like Sinister and Joey who really work for years and years and years to make it where they want to make it. And those are the type of artists that I think we need more of. I mean, if you love music as much as a lot of artists say they do, you'd be making it for absolutely nobody. You might put it out and get 2 views and still be happy with it because you love the process that much. But anyways, with that said, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Big shout out to Sinister. Hopefully he keeps growing as an artist. I'm excited to see where he goes. Shout out to Knife Gang. I keep forgetting to say that at the end of these videos, but Knife Gang, Knife Gang, Knife Gang. And if you really liked the video, subscribe to the channel because we're almost to 20K and I really want to make it there. Might even help me get out of this country hellhole that I live in. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next one. Peace.